The radio crackled with static as dawn broke over Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. Squadron Commander Colonel Marcus Kane adjusted his headset, squinting at the unusual entry on his morning briefing tablet. Among the call signs of his elite fighter pilots, Viper, Hawk, Thunder, sat one that made him shake his head. Heiress. "Sir, you sure about this?" Lieutenant Colonel Davis whispered, nodding toward the lone figure walking across the tarmac toward a pristine F-15E Strike Eagle. The aircraft gleamed in the desert sun, its corporate-sponsored paint job a stark contrast to the weathered military gray of the squadron's jets. "That's Olympia Castellanos, the tech billionaire's daughter." Kane watched through the tower's reinforced glass as the woman, barely 5'5", her dark hair pulled back in regulation style, conducted her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. Her flight suit bore no squadron patches, no campaign ribbons, just her name tape and wings. Fresh from civilian flight training, they'd been told. A publicity stunt arranged at levels far above Kane's pay grade. "Money can buy you an F-15, Kane muttered into his coffee. "Can't buy you the years it takes to master one." The morning's exercise was routine, a simulated air-to-air engagement over the Nevada test range. Red flag training at its most basic level. Kane's four-ship formation of combat veterans would play the role of defending fighters while the newcomer attempted to penetrate their airspace. Standard procedure for breaking in rookies, though none had ever arrived in a $40 million aircraft with their family name stenciled on the corporate accounts. "Tower, heiress requesting clearance for taxi," came the voice over the radio. Calm, professional, with the faintest trace of an accent that suggested expensive international schools. "Heiress cleared to taxi runway 27, the controller responded, unable to keep the smirk out of his voice. Major Sarah Viper Rodriguez, Kane's deputy and lead pilot, keyed her mic from the cockpit of her own Eagle. "Heiress Viper, hope Daddy packed you a good lunch. This isn't Microsoft Flight Simulator." Silence, then, "Copy Viper, looking forward to the lesson." Kane shook his head. In 30 minutes, the Air Force's most decorated fighter squadron would be facing off against a civilian contractor with more money than combat experience. The betting pool in the squadron ready room had reached $3,000, all of it wagered against the newcomer. What none of them knew was that Olympia Castellanos had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The laughter echoing through the tower would soon turn to stunned silence, and by sunset, the legend of Heiress would be written in the desert sky above Nevada, changing everything they thought they knew about privilege, preparation, and the price of underestimating someone who had nothing left to prove except everything. The engines began to spool up. History was about to unfold at 30,000 feet. 23 years earlier, a 7-year-old girl stood at the window of her father's penthouse office in downtown Seattle, watching FA-18 Hornets streak across Elliott Bay during Seafair weekend. Alejandro Castellanos, founder of Castellanos Defense Technologies, knelt beside his daughter as she pressed her small hands against the glass. "Myra Olympia," he whispered in Spanish, his voice thick with an emotion she wouldn't understand until much later. "You see how they move, like dancers in the sky." Her mother, Elena, approached from behind, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Alejandro, don't fill her head with fantasies. She needs to focus on mathematics, on business. The company will be hers someday." But Olympia's dark eyes never left the aircraft. Something in their graceful violence, their controlled power, called to her in a way that spreadsheets and board meetings never would. Her father noticed. He always noticed. That night, Alejandro made 2 phone calls. The first was to a retired Navy pilot named Commander Rebecca "Ghost" Morrison, who had transitioned from the cockpit to civilian flight instruction after losing her left eye in a training accident. The second was to the curator of the Museum of Flight, arranging for private tour every Saturday morning. "If she's going to dream," he told Elena as they watched their daughter sketch aircraft in her notebook, Then she'll dream with precision. Alina Castellanos had married a dreamer who built those dreams into a $12 billion empire. She recognized the look in her daughter's eyes, the same focused intensity that had driven Alejandro from a two-room apartment in East LA to the pinnacle of defense contracting. But she also knew the cost of such dreams. The aviation world doesn't welcome women, Alina said quietly. Especially not wealthy women. They'll think she's playing dress-up with daddy's money. Then she'll prove them wrong, Alejandro replied. Just like her mother proved them wrong when they said a literature professor from Madrid had no business running corporate strategy. By her 8th birthday, Olympia could identify every military aircraft in her father's defense contracts. By 12, she was taking weekend lessons in a Cessna 172 at Boeing Field. By 16, she was flying aerobatic sequences that made her instructors nervous. But it was the day Commander Morrison took her up in a vintage T6 Texan trainer that everything crystallized. "Feel that?" Morrison had said, pulling the stick back into a climbing turn. "That's not just physics, that's poetry, but poetry written in precision, in discipline, in the kind of preparation that turns instinct into survival." Olympia graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in aerospace engineering and computer science, then shocked everyone by enlisting in the Air Force. But a childhood injury, a compound fracture from a riding accident that had healed imperfectly, disqualified her from military pilot training during the medical examination. The rejection letter arrived on her 22nd birthday. Alina found her daughter in the hangar behind their Mercer Island estate, methodically cleaning the engine of her P-51 Mustang restoration project, tears falling onto the vintage metal. "Sometimes," Alina said, sitting beside her daughter on an overturned crate, "we must find another way to reach the sky." The corporate aviation world embraced Olympia Castellanos with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for very large checks. Flight schools competed for her business. Aircraft manufacturers offered her prototype evaluations. Within 2 years, she held ratings in everything from business jets to vintage warbirds, accumulating flight hours with the methodical intensity she'd inherited from both parents. But corporate flying wasn't combat flying. The civilian aviation community respected her skills but remained skeptical about her motivations. "Rich girl's hobby," they whispered at air shows and flight symposiums, "playing pilot with daddy's airplanes." The truth was more complex. Olympia flew because the cockpit was the only place where her father's money couldn't follow her, where Alina's expectations couldn't reach her, where the weight of inheriting a defense empire couldn't touch her. At 30,000 feet, she was simply a pilot, not an heiress, not a symbol, not a disappointment to military recruiters, just a human being connected to a machine designed to transcend human limitations. Commander Morrison, now in her 60s and serving as Olympia's primary instructor, understood. "You're not flying to get somewhere," she observed during a particularly challenging aerobatic session. "You're flying to become someone." "Who?" Olympia asked, stabilizing their extra 330 after a sequence of barrel rolls. "That's for you to discover, but I suspect she's going to surprise a lot of people." The breakthrough came when Alejandro's company landed a contract to evaluate next-generation avionics systems for the Air Force's F-15 upgrade program. The contract required civilian test pilots with specific qualifications, advanced ratings, engineering backgrounds, and the ability to interface with military protocols without holding active commissions. "It's a foot in the door," Alejandro explained over dinner at their family compound. "Not the military service you wanted, but a chance to prove yourself in their world by their standards." Alina set down her wine glass. "It's dangerous, Alejandro, combat aircraft, even in testing roles." "Everything worthwhile is dangerous," Olympia interrupted. "Besides, it's just systems evaluation, not combat." But as she spoke, she was already planning. Systems evaluation would require integration with operational squadrons. Integration meant training exercises. Training exercises meant proving herself against pilots who had earned their wings through military channels she'd been denied. Commander Morrison smiled when Olympia called with the news. Ghost had been waiting 23 years for this phone call. Time to show them what you've learned, heiress. The call sign had started as a joke during their training sessions, but it stuck. Morrison used it with affection, but Olympia knew how it would sound to active-duty military pilots. Privileged, unearned, a reminder that she'd bought her way into their world. Perfect, let them underestimate her. She'd been preparing her entire life for exactly that advantage. The contracting process took 6 months of bureaucratic navigation, security clearances, and political maneuvering at levels that required her father's influence. But when the acceptance letter arrived, formal, clinical, with the Department of Defense seal, Olympia felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: pure, uncomplicated joy. Her first day at Nellie's Air Force Base began at 500 hours with a security briefing that made clear her civilian contractor status. She would train with operational squadrons, but remain outside their command structure. She would evaluate systems but not participate in classified operations. She would fly military aircraft but never be considered military. Understood, she told the briefing officer, though inside she was already calculating how to transcend those limitations. The 414th Fighter Squadron, known as the Red Eagles, was elite even by Nellie's standards. Their mission: adversary training for the Air Force's top pilots. Their commander, Colonel Kane, had flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. Their pilots averaged over 1,000 hours in F-15s and F-16s. Their reputation was built on humbling, cocky aviators who thought they understood air combat. Olympia's introduction to the squadron came during a morning briefing where Kane announced her assignment with barely concealed skepticism. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet our new systems evaluator. She'll be flying with us for the next 6 months, testing upgrades to the Eagle's avionics package." 23 pairs of eyes assessed her with the clinical precision of predators evaluating prey. She recognized the look. She'd seen it in boardrooms when executives assumed the young woman in the corner was someone's assistant, not someone's successor. Major Rodriguez, call sign Viper, raised her hand. "Sir, what's her flight experience?" Kane consulted his tablet. 2,000 hours civilian, multiple type ratings, aerobatic certification. He paused. No military experience. The silence that followed spoke volumes. 2,000 hours was respectable for a civilian pilot, but barely adequate for someone planning to fly with combat veterans. The absence of military training was damning. "Questions?" Kane asked. Captain Jake "Thunder" Williams, the squadron's youngest pilot but already a veteran of 3 deployments, cleared his throat. "Rules of engagement for the contractor." "Standard training protocols apply," Kane replied. "She's here to evaluate systems, not dogfight." A ripple of suppressed laughter ran through the room. The message was clear. The civilian contractor might fly with them, but she wouldn't compete with them. Olympia said nothing. She'd learned from Alina that sometimes silence was the most powerful response to condescension. Instead, she studied the squadron's tactical display boards, memorizing call signs, aircraft assignments, and recent training scores. After the briefing, she approached Viper directly. "Major Rodriguez, I'd appreciate any guidance you can offer. I know I have a lot to learn." Viper's expression softened slightly. Few pilots, male or female, made it to major rank without encountering their share of skepticism. "Advice: don't try to prove anything on your first sortie. These birds are unforgiving to pilots who think they're more capable than they actually are." "Understood, thank you." But as Olympia walked toward her assigned aircraft, the corporate-sponsored F-15E that had been modified to her father's specifications, She was already planning exactly how she intended to prove everything. The F-15E strike Eagle assigned to Olympia represented the pinnacle of her father's aerospace engineering legacy. While externally identical to the Air Force's standard aircraft, every system had been upgraded with Castellano's defense technology's latest innovations. The radar was more sensitive, the avionics more intuitive, the engine monitoring more precise. "She's beautiful," Captain Williams admitted grudgingly as he watched Olympia conduct her pre-flight inspection. "Bet she cost more than my house." "3 houses," Olympia replied without looking up from her external fuel tank examination. "But she's not just expensive, she's better." The statement hung in the desert air like a challenge. Williams glanced at his squadron mates, eyebrows raised. The civilian contractor had just implied her aircraft was superior to theirs, a declaration that bordered on insult in military aviation culture. Master Sergeant Tom Rivera, the squadron's senior enlisted maintainer, approached with Olympia's helmet and survival gear. "Ma'am, first time in an Eagle." "First time in an F-15E, she clarified. "I've flown the C model in civilian demonstrations." Rivera nodded approvingly. The F-15C was a single-seat air superiority fighter, while the E model was a two-seat strike aircraft with significantly different handling characteristics. The fact that she acknowledged the distinction suggested at least basic understanding of the platform. "Any questions about the ejection seat?" Rivera asked, his tone professional but cautious. "Martin Baker ACESII, 00 capability, 18G rating," Olympia recited. "Same system my father's company helped redesign for the Israeli Air Force upgrade program." Rivera's eyebrows rose. Most civilian pilots were nervous about ejection systems. This one was discussing technical specifications like a test pilot. "Your WSO will brief you on combat systems," Rivera continued, referring to the weapons systems officer who would occupy the Eagle's rear seat. "Lieutenant Morrison." "Any relation to Commander Rebecca Morrison?" Olympia interrupted. "Her daughter, actually, recent graduate from Pensacola." Olympia smiled for the first time since arriving at Nellie's. The military aviation community was smaller than most people realized, and connections mattered. More importantly, the younger Morrison would likely share her mother's clinical approach to flight instruction. Lieutenant Jennifer Compass. Morrison appeared at the aircraft's boarding ladder, her dark hair tucked under her flight cap, her movements carrying the precise efficiency of someone raised around military protocol. She was perhaps 25, with her mother's sharp eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that came from exceeding expectations consistently. "Ms. Castellanos, I'm your WSO for today's evaluation flight." "Your mother was my primary civilian instructor," Olympia said, accepting the lieutenant's handshake. "I know, she told me to take good care of you." Compass paused. "She also told me not to underestimate you." They climbed into the aircraft together, Olympia settling into the front seat while Compass occupied the rear cockpit position. The familiar ritual of strapping in, connecting oxygen, and initializing systems felt like coming home. "Systems check," Compass announced over the internal communication system. For the next 20 minutes, they methodically verified every component of the aircraft: engines, hydraulics, flight controls, navigation, communication, and weapon systems. Olympia's responses were crisp, accurate, and faster than Compass expected from a civilian contractor. "You've been studying," Compass observed. "For 23 years, Olympia replied. As they completed the checklist, Colonel Kane's voice came over the radio. "Eris, you're cleared for taxi. Stay tight on Viper's wing during the initial climb. This is an evaluation flight, not a demonstration." "Copy control, Eris ready to taxi." But as their F-15E began rolling toward the runway, Olympia was already calculating angles, distances, and opportunities. The morning's exercise was designed to be routine, a simple systems evaluation disguised as basic flight training. What the 414th Fighter Squadron didn't realize was that Olympia Castellanos had been preparing for this moment longer than most of their pilots had been flying. Today's evaluation flight was about to become something far more significant than anyone anticipated. The legend of Eris was about to be born. The Nevada test range stretched endlessly below them as the four-ship formation climbed through 20,000 feet. Olympia flew in the number 4 position, maintaining precise formation with the experienced pilots of the 414th Fighter Squadron. Her F-15E's upgraded engines breathed easily in the thin air, the aircraft responding to her inputs with the sensitivity of a thoroughbred. Range control, Viper flight checking in, Major Rodriguez announced over the radio. 4 Eagles for air-to-air training, requesting working area Bravo 17. Viper flight cleared into Bravo 17. Squawk 1252, contact red flag control on 251.2. The transition to the training frequency crackled with military efficiency. Olympia listened to the radio chatter, memorizing call signs and procedures. In the rear seat, Lieutenant Morrison monitored the aircraft's systems while providing a running commentary on the squadron's training protocols. Today's scenario is basic intercept geometry, Compass explained through the intercom. Viper will vector us towards simulated threat aircraft. Our job is to demonstrate the upgraded radar's target acquisition capabilities. Understood, Olympia replied, though she was already thinking several steps ahead. Basic intercept geometry was fundamental air combat maneuvering. The upgraded radar would identify targets faster and more accurately than standard systems, but real advantage came from how quickly a pilot could process that information and act on it. Colonel Kane's voice cut through her thoughts. Eris, this is a systems evaluation flight. Stay in formation, observe procedures, and don't get creative. Copy control. But creativity, Olympia had learned from her father, was often the difference between success and mediocrity. The Air Force wanted to evaluate her avionics package under controlled conditions. She intended to demonstrate its capabilities under realistic ones. 20 miles ahead, 4 F-16 Fighting Falcons from the base's aggressor squadron climbed to intercept altitude. Their pilots, trained to replicate foreign Air Force tactics, would serve as the Red Force for today's exercise. It was routine training that happened dozens of times each month at Nellie's. Contact bearing 40 miles, announced Captain Williams from Viper 3. 4 groups climbing. Tally, Rodriguez replied, using the traditional term for visual contact with target aircraft. Viper flight, come starboard to 90, maintain altitude. The formation turned east, beginning the geometric dance of air combat. Olympia felt her pulse quicken as the F-15E's upgraded radar began painting detailed pictures of the approaching F-16s. Her display showed not just their positions, but their altitude, speed, heading, and electronic signatures with clarity that surpassed anything in the military inventory. Compass, are you seeing this resolution? She asked through the intercom. Incredible, the WSO replied. We've got positive identification from 35 miles. Standard Eagles would be guessing at this range. The advantage was significant, but advantages meant nothing without the skill to exploit them. Olympia had spent years developing that skill in civilian aircraft, but air combat maneuvering was different. It required thinking in 3 dimensions while pulling multiple G-forces, making split-second decisions while managing complex systems, and maintaining situational awareness while experiencing the most intense physical and mental stress human beings could endure. Viper flight merged plot, called the AWACS controller from 30,000 feet above. Continue as fragged. The exercise was about to begin. 4 F-15Es against 4 F-16s in a ritualized combat that would test aircraft, systems, and most importantly, pilots. For the veterans of the 414th Fighter Squadron, it was routine training. For Olympia Castellanos, it was the final examination in a curriculum that had begun 23 years earlier with a 7-year-old girl watching Blue Angels perform over Elliott Bay. Eris, Colonel Kane's voice carried a warning. Remember, you're an observer today. Copy Control, Olympia replied. But as the gap between opposing formations closed from 30 miles to 20, then 15, she was already calculating intercept angles with the precision of someone who had been born for this moment. The merge happened at 25,000 feet with a closing speed of over 1,000 miles per hour. 8 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft passed within a few thousand feet of each other, their pilots instantly transitioning from the methodical approach phase to the violent chess game of aerial combat. Fox 2, Captain Williams called, simulating an infrared missile shot against the lead F-16. In actual combat, the missile would have killed the target pilot. In training, it was recorded by sophisticated scoring systems that would determine hits and kills with mathematical precision. Splash 1 came the confirmation from the range control officers monitoring the exercise. Rodriguez led the formation into a hard left turn, pulling 6 Gs as she positioned for follow-up attacks. Viper 2, take the trailer. Viper 3, you're defensive. The radio calls came fast and precise as experienced pilots worked through combat sequences they'd practiced hundreds of times. Olympia maintained her position in the formation, but her upgraded radar was providing situational awareness that none of the other Eagles possessed. Compass, I've got a Viper climbing in our 7 o'clock, she reported through the intercom, referring to an F-16 attempting to maneuver behind their formation. I don't see him, Lieutenant Morrison replied, scanning her tactical display. Trust me, he's there, 12,000 feet below us, climbing hard. The upgraded radar's detection capabilities were demonstrating their value, but information was useless unless acted upon. The F-16 in their blind spot would achieve an advantageous position within 30 seconds unless someone disrupted his attack geometry. Control, Eris requesting permission to maneuver defensively, Olympia called. Negative, Eris, maintain formation position. But the F-16 was 15 seconds from achieving missile lock. Olympia faced a decision that every combat pilot encountered eventually: follow orders that might result in mission failure, or use initiative that might result in disciplinary action. Compass, hang on, she said quietly. Hang on to what? Olympia rolled the F-15E inverted and pulled the stick back, executing a split-S maneuver that dropped them 5,000 feet in 10 seconds. The G-forces pressed both women into their seats as the Eagle accelerated toward the desert floor, trading altitude for speed and disrupting the F-16's attack solution. Eris, what the hell are you doing? Kane's voice crackled with anger. Defensive maneuvers, Olympia replied, pulling out of the dive and climbing back toward the engagement. Bandit in R6 is neutralized. Confirmed kill on Viper 4, the range controller announced. F-16 had valid shot parameters before Eris broke formation. The radio went quiet. In 15 seconds, Olympia had demonstrated tactical awareness beyond her supposed experience level and executed a maneuver that had saved her aircraft from simulated destruction. More importantly, she'd done it while violating direct orders from her commanding officer. Eris, return to base immediately, Kane ordered. Sir, we're still engaged. Now, Eris. Olympia began a turn toward Nellie's, but the tactical situation was still developing. The remaining F-16s were positioning for attacks against the other F-15Es, and her upgraded systems were tracking movements that standard radars couldn't detect. Viper lead, you've got 2 bandits coming out of the sun, she called. High and fast, diving on your position. Rodriguez acknowledged the warning and successfully defeated the attack, but the damage to Olympia's standing was already done. She'd broken formation, violated orders, and demonstrated capabilities that made her superior officers uncomfortable. As they flew back toward base, Lieutenant Morrison spoke quietly through the intercom. "That was good flying. My mother taught you well." "Thank you, but I think I just ended my military aviation career before it started." "Maybe. Or maybe you just showed them you're more than a rich girl playing with expensive toys." Below them, the Nevada desert stretched toward mountains that caught the morning light like broken glass. Somewhere in that vastness, Olympia's future was being decided by men who would have to choose between their prejudices and her demonstrated abilities. The debriefing room at Nellie's Air Force Base felt like a courtroom as Olympia faced the assembled leadership of the 414th Fighter Squadron. Colonel Kane sat at the head of a conference table scarred by years of similar sessions, his expression unreadable. Major Rodriguez occupied the seat to his right, while the other squadron pilots lined the walls like a military tribunal. "Ms. Castellanos," Kane began, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "you were given specific instructions to maintain formation and observe procedures. Instead, you broke formation, executed unauthorized maneuvers, and disrupted a planned training evolution." "Yes, sir," Olympia replied, knowing that explanations would only make her situation worse. "Care to elaborate?" She considered her options. Military culture valued adherence to orders above individual initiative, but it also respected results. Her maneuver had prevented a simulated kill against her aircraft and provided tactical intelligence that helped other formation members complete their missions successfully. "Sir, my systems detected a threat that standard equipment couldn't identify. I made a tactical decision to neutralize that threat while maintaining formation integrity." Captain Williams leaned forward from his position against the wall. "You call breaking formation maintaining integrity." "I call preventing my wingmen from getting shot down maintaining integrity," Olympia replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. In military aviation, wingman responsibilities were sacred. Pilots died protecting their formation partners, and the suggestion that Olympia had acted to protect others reframed her insubordination as tactical judgment. Kane studied her for a long moment. "Your upgraded systems provided situational awareness beyond standard capabilities. That's noted, but combat effectiveness requires discipline, not just technology." "Understood, sir, but it also requires adapting to changing tactical situations." "Are you lecturing me about air combat, Ms. Castellanos?" The question was a trap. Answer yes, and she'd be dismissed as an arrogant civilian. Answer no, and she'd be admitting ignorance. Instead, she chose a third option. "Sir, I'm suggesting that effective systems evaluation requires testing under realistic conditions. Today's exercise provided those conditions." Major Rodriguez spoke for the first time since the debrief began. "What's your assessment of the radar upgrade?" "Superior detection range, enhanced target discrimination, faster processing speed." In a real combat environment, those advantages could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. "And your assessment of your own performance?" Olympia met Rodriguez's gaze directly. "I demonstrated tactical awareness and made decisions under pressure. Whether those decisions were correct depends on whether you value following orders or achieving objectives." The room fell silent. She just articulated the eternal tension between military discipline and combat effectiveness, forcing her evaluators to consider which they prioritized. Kane closed the folder containing her evaluation notes. "Ms. Castellanos, you'll complete your systems assessment as contracted. However, future flights will be conducted under direct supervision, with specific restrictions on maneuvering authority." Understood, sir. As the squadron members filed out, Major Rodriguez lingered behind. Walk with me, she said quietly. They left the building together, crossing the flight line as afternoon shadows lengthened across the tarmac. Fighter aircraft lined the ramp like sleeping predators, their weapons pylons and sensor arrays silhouetted against the desert sky. You flew well today, Rodriguez said. Better than anyone expected. Thank you, ma'am. But you also pissed off a lot of people who don't appreciate civilians, showing them new ways to do their jobs. Olympia nodded. She'd understood the political dynamics from the moment she'd rolled inverted. Military institutions protected themselves by questioning outsiders, especially outsiders with advantages they'd paid for rather than earned. What's your advice, Major? Rodriguez stopped walking and turned to face her. Prove them wrong. Not once, not in a single exercise, but consistently. Show them you're not just a rich girl with good equipment. Show them you're a pilot. 3 weeks into her assignment, Olympia had settled into an uncomfortable routine. Morning flights focused on systems evaluation under carefully controlled conditions. Her F-15E performed flawlessly, the upgraded avionics exceeding specifications in every category. But the restrictions imposed after her first training mission limited her ability to demonstrate the equipment's full capabilities. Eris, maintain heading 90, altitude 20,000, came the familiar instruction from Colonel Kane, who had personally supervised every flight since the formation breaking incident. Copy control, heading 90, Angels 20. From the rear seat, Lieutenant Morrison monitored the radar systems as they flew predetermined patterns over the Nevada test range. The routine was professional but frustrating, like evaluating a Ferrari by driving it through a parking garage. Target acquisition at maximum range, Compass reported through the intercom. Clean lock at 75 miles. Outstanding, Kane acknowledged from his monitoring position in an accompanying aircraft. Continue as briefed. The radio discipline was perfect, the data collection thorough, and the results exactly what Castellano's defense technologies had promised. But Olympia felt like she was wasting her father's investment and her own preparation on exercises designed to minimize rather than maximize aircraft capabilities. The breakthrough came during her 4th week, when maintenance issues grounded 2 of the squadron's regular F-15Es. The 414th Fighter Squadron was scheduled to provide adversary training for a visiting unit from Shaw Air Force Base, and they were 1 aircraft short of meeting their commitment. Eris, you're designated as Viper 4 for today's exercise, Kane announced during the morning briefing. Stay in formation, follow instructions, and don't get creative. Yes, sir. But as they climbed toward the working area, Olympia sensed a difference in the radio chatter. The visiting pilots from Shaw were aggressive, confident, and clearly intended to demonstrate their superiority over the Nelly's training unit. Their leader, call sign Razor, had a reputation for tactical innovation that made him both respected and dangerous. Razor flight checking in, came the transmission from the Shaw Squadron leader. 4 Vipers ready to show you desert rats how it's done back east. The comment was traditional interbase rivalry, but it carried an edge that suggested the visiting pilots intended to prove a point. In the competitive culture of military aviation, reputation was everything, and visiting units often tried to establish dominance during training exercises. Copy, Razor flight, Rodriguez replied with professional coolness. Viper flight ready when you are. The tactical scenario was more complex than Olympia's previous exercises. Both formations would start from opposite ends of the working area and maneuver for advantage in a free-play engagement. No predetermined flight paths, no scripted outcomes, just 8 of the world's most capable fighter aircraft operating under realistic combat rules. Viper flight, contact bearing 180, 50 miles. Captain Williams called from his radar controller position. Tally, Rodriguez replied. Viper flight come right to 200, maintain 25,000. As the formations maneuvered toward each other, Olympia's upgraded radar began painting a tactical picture with unprecedented clarity. The Shaw pilots were using sophisticated electronic countermeasures to mask their exact positions, but her advanced systems were penetrating their deception with ease. Control, Eris requests permission to relay tactical information, she called. Negative, Eris, maintain formation position. But the information she was gathering could determine the outcome of the engagement. The Shaw pilots were setting up an elaborate trap, using one aircraft as bait while positioning the other three for a coordinated attack. Standard F-15 radars couldn't detect the deception, but Olympia's upgraded systems revealed the entire enemy formation. She faced the same choice that had gotten her in trouble 3 weeks earlier: follow orders that might result in failure, or use initiative that might save her squadron mates. This time she chose differently. Viper lead, Eris. I'm seeing something on my display that doesn't match the standard picture, Olympia called, using carefully neutral language that conveyed information without explicitly violating orders. Rodriguez understood immediately. Go ahead, Eris. Single contact bearing 180 might not be accurate. Suggest caution on approach vectors. It was the minimum information necessary to warn the formation about the Shaw squadron's deception, delivered in a way that allowed Rodriguez to make her own tactical decisions. More importantly, it demonstrated that Olympia could provide valuable intelligence while respecting command authority. Copy, Eris. Viper flight adjust to formation delta. The formation change scattered the Nelly's fighters across a broader front, disrupting the Shaw pilots' carefully planned attack geometry. When Razor Flight executed their coordinated strike, they found their targets dispersed and ready instead of concentrated and vulnerable. Fox 2, Rodriguez called, simulating a missile shot against the lead Shaw aircraft. Splash 1, confirmed the range controller. The engagement developed into a complex three-dimensional chess game as individual aircraft maneuvered for advantage. Olympia found herself separated from the main formation, trailing a Shaw F-15 through a series of vertical maneuvers that tested both aircraft and pilot to their limits. Her opponent was skilled, using terrain masking and aggressive maneuvering to break her radar lock repeatedly. But the upgraded systems in her aircraft provided capabilities he couldn't match. When he dove toward the desert floor, attempting to use ground clutter to escape detection, her radar maintained contact through electronic noise that would have blinded standard equipment. Eris Fox 2, she called, simulating a missile shot as the Shaw pilot climbed desperately toward the sun. Splash Razor 3, the controller confirmed. The radio fell silent. In 4 weeks of carefully supervised training flights, Olympia had just achieved her first simulated kill against an experienced military pilot flying identical equipment. The victory was clean, professional, and undeniable. Eris, rejoin on Viper lead, Kane ordered, his voice carrying something that might have been approval. As she maneuvered toward Rodriguez's F-15, Olympia allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She provided tactical intelligence that helped her squadron achieve victory, demonstrated her upgraded systems under realistic conditions, and proven her individual capabilities without violating orders or breaking formation.